Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining Strictly Money at the News Forum. I'm your host, Saijal Patel. In today's program, we're going to discuss financial fraud and detecting bad financial advice. Just this year alone, Canadians lost nearly $150 million to fraud. And while fraud can hit anyone, there are certain groups that are particularly vulnerable. Take, for instance, senior citizens. Seniors are often home during the day to answer phone calls. They may not be as tech savvy, and many don't have a trusted circle of family and friends to get a second opinion when something doesn't feel quite right. Laura Tamblyn Watts is the CEO of CanAge, Canada's National Seniors Advocacy Organization, and she joins me now to discuss her work and insights into how we can better protect seniors from fraud. Laura, it's great to have you on the show today.
Great to be here.
So I suppose it's not surprising that fraud is the top crime against older Canadians. Do you think that we're making progress or stride in protecting seniors, or do you think it's just tough to keep up with new scams?
We're not really making strides, and the scammers are getting better and better. It is a really vicious capital market, and frauds and scams are increasing, particularly right now in the time of COVID-19, where there's additional confusion about the markets and about what's going on. So we are falling behind where we need to be in responding to frauds and scams for seniors.
So let's run through some of the popular ones, I guess, that seniors are defrauded. Phone scams. You know, we hear about getting phone calls where they claim that they're the government or the CRA or the bank, and they ask for personal information. What advice do you have?
First of all, they're really frightening. That's the first point. And people, particularly those who may not be familiar with the government services, can often get taken in. You know, the first thing is to stop and just hang up the phone. I know it sounds obvious, but any service from the government you can call directly. So the simple thing to do is say, I'm going to call you back. Don't take the number that they give you. Go onto the website or look it up in the phone book or ask the operator and call directly. It's easy to say that the government will never call you, but it's actually not quite true. Sometimes the TRA does phone, but you've got to make sure that you contact them, not vice versa.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point because some get very aggressive. And when they get persistent, even though you might know that something's wrong, that doubt creeps in, doesn't it? And they think, well, what if this is legit and I get in trouble?
And as I say, it is frightening. People are afraid of the CRA. They're afraid of taxes. They're being told that if they don't do things, terrible things are going to happen. And remember, the fraudsters are really good at their job, and they wouldn't be doing the job unless they were good at it. They will listen for your cues. If you gasp, or if you're concerned, or if you're asking questions, they will follow you on that journey. Some of the things to look out for: a sense of immediacy. The government doesn't ask for things to happen immediately. And so you can always call them. You can also make sure that if you were going to have to do a payment, again, you should be reaching out to the government through the channels and find out what information they need. Never give your SIN number or any personal number to somebody who calls you.
Email scams, like a lot of phishing emails, and especially, you know, they have the logo. It looks very legitimate.
They are just immaculate in some cases. There are ones that are easy to see. They have spelling mistakes. They're not quite right. You can tell pretty easily by the language used that it's not them. But there are ones that we call mirror sites. They are quite literally a mirror of the website with some different links in them. They're very difficult. Again, it's that same piece. Don't respond. Phone the direct number or go into a branch if you have the question.
So you talked about some of the things to look for. What about other patterns like frequency of communication? Are there other things that they should look for?
It's important to remember that if you get hooked once, that information is getting shared on a black market. They actually have what they call suckers lists, and they sell them in the same way that legitimate companies sell leads as well. So your information is going for between $4 and $10 and being sold broadly. So if you're getting a lot of calls, you can be sure that your information has been sold. That's where you want to shut down all the communications and make sure you're reporting that to the Anti-Fraud Center and possibly the police.
Wow, I had no idea about suckers lists. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, good point. If it's too good to be true, it probably is. We're gonna continue this conversation after this short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. I'm here with Laura Tamblyn Watts of CanAge. Laura, I want to switch gears and talk about financial services, the industry. I know you've had lots of discussions there. What are some of the steps that they're doing to be proactive in protecting seniors?
We've come a ways. We've got a ways still to go. So in 2019, there's a voluntary banking code that requires that each bank have a seniors champion. They also have mandatory obligations to learn about abuse and neglect and have specific reporting structures in place. So we're getting there. This is still pretty new. And this information also has to be sent to FCAC, which is the regulator of banks. So we're at the very beginning now of starting to implement some measures to both help consumers understand what the system is, but also for response for people who got themselves in a bad way.
Laura, I remember when I first started in the financial industry and I was an advisor's assistant, there was a case where the mom had signed over the authority to the daughter. It was very obvious that the daughter was siphoning money for her own use. Now, this was 20 years ago. There was nothing we could have done. And I think since then, at least I know in the US, they've put systems in place where the advisors can interject. Do you know if that's the case here in Canada?
In the investment sector, they've really taken good strides for it. So the securities regulators, the CRA and the CSA, and some of the other acronyms that that help to regulate the system have put measures in place. But again, early days. You are allowed to freeze assets or freeze routine and extraordinary payments that go through. We usually suggest that people don't freeze the routine ones because that can cause more trouble. But it is extremely common for family members to take advantage. We know that power of attorney fraud, in terms of using the money not for the purpose that it's supposed to be for the older person, but for themselves, or alternatively, joint accounts where you have additional sort of shared account, which people often do for estate reasons, gets us into terrible situations. So there are more powers that advisors or bankers can use, but again, it's still in early days in Canada.
Yeah, Laura, I mean, it is it is natural to trust a family member, but sometimes they don't always have your best interest in heart. I mean, it's not as common, but you do see it. From my understanding, do you recommend that seniors find a few trusted confidants then, as opposed to one, have a bigger circle?
It's really important if people can have a number of different folks that they look to who are trusted. But again, not everyone has that. Right now, in the investment sector, we're starting to ask for a trusted contact person. It doesn't have to be a power of attorney. In some cases, maybe it shouldn't be that person, but that gives permission for the advisor to reach out if there's concerns about elder abuse or some type of mental capacity issue to this person. They don't get to make decisions, but there are extra safety net that can be put in place. We don't have that for banking yet, but it is a useful tool that we're starting to bring in just now in Canada for advisors.
What about getting bad advice or being sold a product that may not be suited for seniors? What sort of actions can seniors take, or what should they be aware of?
Suitability is a really important piece. We see time again, some advisors, either for their own benefit or maybe just lack of their own knowledge, selling products to seniors which are just not a match for them. Perhaps they have too long a time horizon associated with when the benefit will realize, or they've got different trailing aspects to it which are not useful for them. We know that's a really hard thing. Now, the advisors are regulated. You can complain to the regulators who do take it seriously. Or if you can't come up with a solution there, you can take it to the Ombudsman for Banking Services and Investment. obsi.ca has lots of great information. It's a free service, and you can actually get up to $350,000 back. They're looking at increasing that now to $500,000 because we know how hard it is to go to the courts.
Yeah. Now, is it just fiduciary duty, the advisors that have fiduciary duty, or does this apply to others that come under that label of advisors?
It is anyone who's regulated in that space. So if you're part of the Mutual Fund Dealers Association, if you're under IROC, the Investment Industry Regulatory Organization of Canada, if you fall under one of the regulated agencies, you can apply to OBSI and see if you can't work something out there.
All right. Laura, it was great having you on the show. Thank you so much. We'll have to have you back.
Thank you.
Thanks. That was Laura Tamblyn Watts of CanAge. Welcome back to Strictly Money. We're continuing our conversation on how to protect Canadians from financial fraud and bad financial advice. British Columbia's Securities Commission has done a lot of research on this topic, and to share their findings, Pamela McDonald joins us. She's the Director of Communications and Education at the BC Securities Commission. Pamela, thanks for coming on Strictly Money today.
My pleasure.
So earlier in the show, we were discussing how seniors are particularly vulnerable to financial fraud. What I thought was interesting is your research shows that the younger generation is also one of the vulnerable groups. Tell us about that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's correct. I think it's important to say that anybody can become the victim of investment fraud. So nobody is immune to it. But our research has consistently shown that younger people are less likely to be able to identify the warning signs of fraud. One study that we did showed that fraud vulnerability is actually highest among younger British Columbians. So the study showed that about 40%, 47%, so close to 50% of young millennial women, those aged 18 to 34, would look into a potentially fraudulent investment offer. And sort of men in the same group, so young millennial men, about 35% would do the same. So those are very high numbers. We also know that millennials they're less unsure about where to look for investing information. They're less familiar with the retail investing industry. And of course, this makes sense. They're less knowledgeable about investing than older generations. So all of those things can make you more vulnerable to fraud, and all the more reason why you need to learn about making good investment decisions.
Yeah, and I found that actually quite surprising that the younger generation is less knowledgeable about investing, because you would think that they're more savvy. You would think that they would be more prone to research because, they're more savvy with tech.
Well, I think the research also shows that a lot of young people are very susceptible to FOMO, or the fear of missing out. So they act really quickly. They respond to hype, things that they hear on social media, and don't always look for extra advice, perhaps outside of social media, to really discern how to look for, what is a good investment and what could be potentially fraudulent. So, and we know that fraudsters will use whatever tools that they can to sort of steal your money. And social media is a great tool for that. So it allows a fraudster to reach a large group of people very quickly. And importantly, they can do it anonymously. So, we always tell people, if you're going to get advice from social media, it's not that you shouldn't do that, but you should back it up with another source.
Yeah, I think what's interesting too is the FOMO piece, right? Because one of the rules in investing is know your risk tolerance. But with FOMO, that kind of goes out the door. And I'm wondering if you're seeing this worrisome trend of this push towards do it yourself, because, this message is out there like, why would you need a professional when you can save money? And the problem is they don't always do the right research, do they?
No, we know people aren't doing their research. We know that younger people can get very caught up in hype. And so, what you're seeing on social media does look interesting. Just don't rush into it. Look beyond the social media. Do your own research. Maybe you don't want to use a registered investment advisor or professional, but there are other ways that you can do your own research. Check into the company, find out who's behind it, what their business plan is, understand what your money is going into. You talked about risk tolerance, and that is a hugely important factor for everybody who's investing. So you need to understand how much or how little risk you're prepared to take with your money. And there's a lot of different factors that play into risk tolerance. If you're younger, you have a little more time to stay in the work force and recoup losses if you experience losses. If you're older, you don't have that opportunity. So you can take a little more risk when you're younger. But another factor is if you rely on your investments for sources of income for day-to-day living, then you might not be willing to take as much risk. And of course, some people they just have that kind of personality that they're anxious and they don't like risk. And, if the bumps in the market, markets going up and down make you feel anxious, then that will tell you a little bit about the kind of risk you're willing to take.
Yeah, I think that's so important and it really does sometimes come down to that financial education, doesn't it? Is understanding those pieces. Pamela, we're going to take a quick commercial break. And when we come back, I want to get your thoughts a little bit more on social media.
Right.
Welcome back. Our guest is Pamela McDonald from the BC Securities Commission. Pamela, before the break, you had talked a little bit about social media. I want to continue on that because there is questionable advice on the social media platform. And the problem or the challenge is that information isn't regulated. What should people look for to discern between bad and good or professional advice? Because one of the challenges that I see or I guess the trend that I see is that people say, you know what, this person, I resonate with them. They look cool or they seem to relate to me. And then they get bought into what they're saying.
Yeah, it's very easy to get caught up in something that a lot of other people are doing. And of course, we saw those things happening earlier this year through information and that people were getting on chat rooms like Reddit. And as I said earlier, fraudsters can get into those rooms or get into online platforms and do it anonymously and reach out to a large bunch of people. And they, that group kind of coalesces and does things as a group. So we want people to be very cautious when they're looking at social media posts. It's important, if you can, to find out about the individual who is giving you investment information. And if you can't do that through social media, then what you need to do is on your own, find out more about the investment. So take some time, do your homework, ask other people about the company, ask if they know that it's a solid investment. Find out about the company's business plan, the people behind it, that it's an actual thing, that it's an actual proper investment that has the opportunity to give you returns. So don't just rely on advice from those forums. And we know that young people, from the research that we've done, are just more susceptible to this fear of missing out. And they're more likely than, say, older generations to feel that social media is a good place to get good information. And they're more likely to act quickly. So again, if you find out through social media that there's this great opportunity and you want to invest in it, don't rush into it. Look beyond social media, do your homework.
We have about 2.5 minutes left, and you have 5 investment fraud warning signs or flags to watch for. Can you run through those? I mean, we talked about FOMO, but you have other ones like high return, no risk.
Yeah, and that's sort of the big one. Particularly, you've got your money in a bank and interest rates are low. If somebody comes to you with an investment opportunity and they say that there's no risk, that there's guaranteed high returns, that is a big red flag. If it sounds too good to be true, it likely is. So take your time, find out more. It is very unrealistic for for example, somebody to say, I'm going to give you 10% return every month. So don't fall for that. Do your homework. We talked about fear of missing out. And, this is where fraudsters are very skilled at making you feel like you're sitting on the sidelines where other people are making lots of money. So it's important not to be emotional about this. Try to take your emotions out of it and let the facts do the talking. And the other thing, is something we call the trust trap. And it's also called affinity fraud. And this is where, someone we know might unwittingly promote a fraud, even without realizing that it is a fraudulent investment. It could be a friend, a family member, a colleague that you really trust. The fourth one is pressure to buy. So fraudsters are really great at high pressure sales tactics. They'll tell you that there's no time for you to think about this or to do your homework or to ask questions. Just get in now, sign on the dotted line. So, we always say the best investment that the investment you never make could be the best investment you ever make. So it's always okay to say no.
Yeah.
And the last one is questions not answered. If you have questions, you should ask them. And people are coming back to you with, some kind of, baffle gab that makes you feel like you have even more questions. Don't move forward. If you can't get your questions answered, go to somebody that can. Walk away.
Yeah. Yeah. And so important to look at reliable sources. I know your website certainly has the unbiased information and tools as well. Pamela, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Pamela McDonald of the BC Securities Commission. If you have thoughts or questions about today's show, send through an email. I'd love to hear from you. Until then, stay well, stay wise, and stay wealthy. Thanks for watching.